All right, so we have a real treat this morning. We're going to start off with Jason Anderson from Blizzard Entertainment. And those of you who follow on Twitter, you may know him as Dirk Gently on Twitter. Those of you who read the Green Book blog will know him as Jason Anderson. Or you may know him as that guy who wrote the infamous post about the 8 things I would not do if I owned a market research company. And one of the highest rated posts we ever had on Green Book blog. Jason is a technologist, an iconoclast, a visionary, and thrilled to have him start things off for us today. So Jason, please come on up.
And thank you for rewarding me with 8:20 in the morning after an open bar. That's, I think you're all probably doing much better at adjusting to that than I am. I'm a little sluggish right now. I'm going to be going a little bit off script compared to the slides here. I've been trying to make some mental adjustments based on what we've been covering during the day yesterday. But my main goal over the next 15 minutes is really just to walk you through a brief history of information technology and how that has been impacting just social behavior in the large, and then look forward a little bit more into how does that apply in a research context. So you can read all of this story through any industry lens you want. I'll be telling it more from the technologist point of view, just since that's where my background's been from, but I'm also working as a client-side researcher, so I have a little bit of both of those pieces. We're going to start with the creation of the internet as the beginning of our story. This is the first internet, the telegraph. I believe it was 1837 or so that it came out. It was the first global information network. It offered instantaneous delivery of messages point to point. It was a pure information economy. This was the first time where we separated out physical distribution of stuff from knowledge. It was actually a very social system. So it's not just in the obvious ways where you think of where, you know, citizen A could send a message to citizens B in a kind of a secure private mechanism. It actually was a private bulletin board system for the telegraph operators. And so all the things you think of right now in the modern internet, where you have acronyms and kind of subcultures, that was all happening over a century ago on the telegraph systems because you had downtime when messages weren't being sent, and so they were kind of gossiping and sharing stories and whatnot. This is all also when you started having issues with information security. So this would be the first time where securing information was just not a matter of putting armed guards around the person that was transporting the data. You had all these other intermediary points along the way, and also with privacy. So we're still wrestling with privacy and what that means in an information environment. But how do governments send information, for example, from point A to point B on a telegraph system and feel, you know, confident in what's happening there? So it was absolutely global. This was what the telegraph network looked like in the mid-1800s. 6 continents. They were using underwater cables across the Atlantic, across the Pacific to get information from point to point. This is exactly how the modern internet works. We have these big cables that go from different places. And the implications of this new information network were pretty vast, both on a social and an industry level. As I mentioned, it separated information from transportation, but it also started creating a new concept for what is media. It was really a moment where you now had the ability to broadcast stuff from a single point out into a very large number of points and very large distances. Conversely, you could go the other direction where you're collecting information from all these remote locations into a central command and control structure. So that was creating all sorts of monopoly powers that maybe didn't exist in the past. Things like AT&T or Western Union, you know, these were enormous entities that were made possible and were born because of the telegraph. Wireless news services, these were born during the telegraph era. So, you know, we still have Associated Press. This is why. And so this was the point where now everybody at a local level, when they thought about information and what's going on in the world, their world now included big stuff happening overseas or on the other side of the country. It's not quite as obsessive as it is today, where we hop on Twitter and we're getting, you know, real-time updates 30 seconds after there's been a terrorist attack. But it's still, this is the beginning of that wave, right? Velocity of information. That's the main link between all of these things. The telegraph was a step order increase in the velocity of information. So that is the pattern that we're continuing to progress through. It's getting Even though it's super fast now, it is still getting faster and faster. So if you think about new information technologies as they are coming out, telegraph, telephone, radio, television, these were happening at about one major revolutionary step per 30 years or so. So if you think back to the 1800s, the average lifespan of an American in the US in 1850 was less than 40 years old. So by and large, if you grew up and you saw the telegraph come into being, that was the only information technology you really had to come to terms with during your lifetime. That was like the one big thing. Similarly, the people that were bore witness to the telephone or the radio, like that was the big story of their lifetime, their generation. They never saw a TV show. Now, an unfortunate consequence of all these new technologies was World War II. Without radio and distributed communications and centralized command and control, you would never have been able to have a military conflict of that size. But it also created a lot of infrastructure and new technology through military research that then, once the war ended, attention got turned to other pursuits. So mechanical calculators started turning into electronic calculators. The electronic calculators needed more reliable ways of storing bits of data, so that led to the transistor. Transistor led to processors. Processors started to want to talk to other processors, so we took that telegraph network idea, and then we applied that to the silicon world. So now you have motherboards with lots of chips on them all talking to each other, kind of in a closed system. And eventually, we got to a point where economies of scale in manufacturing let us make these boxes through a mail order kit. So instead of a room of people and scientists and government agencies being the only ones with this kind of power to process information, anyone could do it. So baby boomers would be the first generation that experienced so many different new information technologies all in one lifespan. You know, a baby boomer, average projected lifespan is about 68. So I hate to break to anybody where maybe they're looking for, you know, to get into the hundreds. If you made it past 60, you're already doing pretty good, but you're kind of on the front end of the curve. But the reality is that for the baby boomers, you're the first ones that grew up with TV in the home, and then you had a telephone in your home, or the other way around. You're the first ones that brought computers into your personal environment. Your children, Gen X, my generation, you know, we're the first ones that grew up with a computer in the home and with computers in schools. And so we've taken that pace, that speed of innovation and of information distribution, and just kept notching it up, right? So next came the World Wide Web. And then we had so much information on the World Wide Web that we had to create search catalogs. So we had Yahoo, right? And that was too hard to manage in a manual sense to categorize everything, so then we started having search engines like Google. Now, that's all going on at the same time. You've got mobile technology, there's continued miniaturization. My generation's the first one where we all started carrying around a mobile phone. I can remember actually the moment in college where I left in the spring and I came back and all of a sudden everybody was getting phones. All the phone carriers were having things on campus. They just sort of latched onto us as this big captive market. Now you have third graders with iPhones. It's a crazy idea. Like if you grew up where television went from being something you had to turn the knob to having a remote control, and now your third grader is playing games on your iPhone, or my 2-year-old is better at using my iPad than I am. I mean, that's a lot of change in a relatively speaking, a relatively short period of time. So we talk about the next generation and what they've been doing with the internet, the millennials and Gen Y. We have a lot of Facebook fascination, perhaps, and Twitter and other social media data interest. This is the fourth new social networking platform we've had in a decade. Anybody here that was on Friendster? All right, not a lot left, but at the time, that was a pretty big deal. A few years later, MySpace came around, took the same idea, kind of built that out, another order of magnitude. Then Facebook came along, stole all those people, brought them into their system. Twitter came out. Not as many people using Twitter necessarily as Facebook, but as far as velocity of information is concerned, there's a lot more stuff happening a lot more quickly on Twitter than there is on Facebook, and that's kind of their play, continuing to pursue the speed of information distribution. So now, with mobile also evolving at the same time, everything's miniaturized to the point where you can do all those things from anywhere you want, talking to anybody you want, wherever they are, and you can use any communication mechanism you choose. You can use text, you can use voice, you can use video, and it all happens in real time. The big difference with people that have grown up on the internet, kind of the hive mind of the internet, we all see information as part of ourselves. So information has value, yes, and maybe it has value as a marketer, but like for me, when I think about my online persona, information is part of my personal value as a human being, right? It's an extension of myself. And we may consciously go out and try to create a particular persona, but we're also very aware of the fact that we're leaving this digital trail behind us that is part of us. And so the internet believes that everybody has access to information in real time. It's just sort of the way it works. It also believes that everybody creates information in real time. Now, this has created a lot of winners and a lot of losers in just a short period of time. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but you can think about the relationship between Amazon and Borders, for example. Borders had been around a lot longer than Amazon, but they didn't exactly survive. What Netflix did to Blockbuster in 10 short years is pretty transformative. I'm going to jump down to internet piracy here for a moment. I work in the video games industry, so piracy is something that's of particular interest to us, and it's a very sensitive subject. You're not going to hear a lot of game publishers or movie studios out there talking about this with a truly kind of honest point of view. But if you were to go back to the Napster era and talk to people that were heavy users of Napster at that time, which were younger people, right? They knew they were getting something for free that they weren't able to get for free before. They were not unaware of that change. But they also don't really feel like they've sinned in the process. The point of view, for the most part, is that the system was already so centralized and corrupted that the people that they cared about, the artists at the end of that value chain, they were getting so little of the money to begin with that it didn't really bother them. And so, what is the value of information to that kind of community? Information is free. The marginal cost of acquiring information is essentially trending to zero. Now, it's not ever going to be actually zero. You still have things like electricity and water that are involved in all of this. But the idea of spending lots of money just to buy a data source, it makes no sense. Like, as a technologist, it makes no sense to me. I will do it for a period of time, but the next thing I'm going to be thinking about is what can I build to go out and create that data for myself so I don't have to pay a marginal cost on it anymore. I would much rather have a permanent system that I control, that I can evolve on my own, that creates the data that I want. Now, at the same time, insight does have value, and this is something where I think technologists and computer scientists and software engineers they understand this because they've been trained to take raw data and to turn that into something that's just useful and brilliant, right? That's the whole point, is to transform data from chaos into order. Even better than that is transforming that data into something that you can act on. Action is really priceless. Not only in the sense that action is the way you can measure the value of what you've just done, but by creating action, you're creating new data that is of higher value. And with that data, you can then begin to build in sort of self-repeating mechanisms with automated response systems. An example I think of is Dell. This is probably about a 10-year-old example. But on their website, you're configuring your computer, and you've got a base model that has a particular price, and you can pick a CPU, you can pick a graphics card, and you can pick all these different little components that go into the system, right? That pricing could change 3 times a day. And that pricing can change 3 times a day because it is deeply integrated with their supply chain. And so if they're in a situation where they have excess inventory of a particular component in a category, well, guess what? They just tweak the pricing a little bit until they get their supply chain back in balance. We've been doing that for a very long time, from the beginning, really. That's one small example of the power that you can get from automated, rapid transformation of real-time data. Now, another interesting side effect of living in the internet or growing up in the internet is everybody has been trying to quantify what we do and measure it and put it into charts and put it into reports for a long time. And so we're kind of at this point where a lot of people just believe that everything can be quantified. I mean, maybe it's hard to do. Maybe it's very manual for now. Maybe there's certain types of information that you really can only get by going out and talking to people and asking them. There's a whole lot of stuff now you can measure through behaviors. At Blizzard, we run a global game, World of Warcraft. Might have heard of it. It's fairly big size. Got about 12 million players worldwide. We've probably touched at least 50 or 60 million consumers over its life. We have, I don't know what's after terabytes or petabytes, whatever the next one is. You know, we have like that kind of data, behavioral data about what are these people doing every second when they're playing the game. We know from that, why do they like to play the game? We know where they are when they do it. We know when they do it, how frequently they do it, how often they buy stuff, how often they turn away, when they come back, why they come back. We have all this data, right? So for me, my role in Blizzard as the entirety of the consumer insights team is to plug the holes that we can't fill through internal analytics. That is the mindset and the worldview of a technology-driven digital business. I'm going to jump forward real quickly here. For me, the difference in paradigm is market research has evolved to serve marketers. Digital businesses are not run by marketers. They are run by analysts. And so when you think about how does market research serve a company like Blizzard or like Xbox or Google or a big technology company where their entire audience is all online and all digital, it's just a totally different question because there's so many more things that we can do just through the data without having to go out and run focus groups or do surveys. Now, not every industry is going to go 100% digital. I mean, the real world does still exist. But all of your customers live in this digital world in some other part of their life. And so those behaviors that companies like mine are training them toward, this transparency of data, this openness of sharing, this ability to measure what they're doing through their online footprint, they are going to come to expect that in other aspects of their life. So I don't have a good answer as to like what is the big transition going to be that mobile causes on the research industry as a whole. My belief is that it will be radical, it will be rapid because of this velocity of change that we're seeing. I mean, we've gotten to a point where you're getting every 2 to 3 years some massive new thing on the scene that no one had ever even thought of before. So now is not a time to be complacent. Now is a time to be experimenting. Now is a time to have technology people in your organization who are growing up in this world and that can educate you about what's new and hot and how can you participate in that economy. So invest in technology, build products, not just services, because at the end of the day, it's those technologies and those products that are going to help differentiate you from your peers. And with that, I think I have balanced my time reasonably well, and I will take any questions.
With your background with Blizzard and World of Warcraft, which my son used to play all the time, and had someone power level him, which I thought was the most ridiculous thing ever. But with your background, how does someone from Blizzard feel about the gamification of market research, like some of the stuff we saw yesterday?
That's a very good question. I'm really torn on it, actually. The concept to me feels like it's valid in the right use cases. I don't think it's something that can be applied universally, and I think it's also something that, like, going through a game experience as part of a research process is going to resonate really well with some audiences and not at all with others. You know, my mother would never take a research game. She'd probably also never take a survey, so maybe it's neither here nor there. But if you're looking at kids' research, or if you're, like in my scenario, I think about, could I use gamification as part of my own research process, since my audience is inherently all gamers. I think the big challenge that hasn't been solved yet is scalability, because building a game there's a lot of tech involved in that. It doesn't have to be the hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend when we make something. You can certainly do it for a lot less, but there's still there's a software development cycle involved in that, and so you need to find a way to templatize what you're doing and to kind of get like some really specific scenarios so you can get some repeatability out of the process.
Hi, it's Tom Van Hammond from Allstate. And my question is, at Allstate, market research serves as C-suite. We serve marketers, but we really serve as C-suite. And the C-suite has a amazing impatience for instant information that immediately addresses their need of the moment. So how do you see mobile technology helping us to better satisfy that need?
That's a good question. My C-suite has the same sort of obsession, fascination with real-time data, particularly because we have our own data. And it's not unusual for me to see the CEO replying to one of our little automated reports, for example. I do think that mobile brings scale that you just can't get through other options. I think the barrier right now is probably on the kind of the reporting and dashboarding analytics side of things. Visualization is really, really important when you're working with that size of data. So I think that's where the big barrier is in my mind. It's where I feel the most pain. But I definitely think it's part of the solution.
Yeah, Jason, great presentation. I want to follow up on the gamification question. Maybe Lenny, you can comment on this too, maybe people in the audience. When the internet came on and we were working in the browser on the desktop computer, there was all this promise of the richness of surveys. My concern was always the cost that was allocated to do a survey, and to your point of repeatability. So it never manifested itself, and people still don't understand that. I think gamification really offers a lot of promise. I was thinking about my mother, who I never thought would love, online slot machines, loves them. So she'd probably love to take a survey that way. Can you talk a little bit from your experience? I mean, Lenny, you can comment. I can comment too, my experience. Sort of what component of the cost is, because I think the big cost here is, the graphic design cost that market research companies don't have, and the survey budget is not going to support. So, can you talk about, that a little bit?
Yeah. So, purely just what does it cost to make a game? I would say our largest cost center is art and audio. There are actually outsourcing shops in Vietnam and India and other places specifically doing game art and game audio to try to bring that cost down into something more digestible. But again, game costs have gotten really high, but you're not trying to make an Xbox game here, right? You're trying to make something that's going to run through a web browser or maybe a mobile device. A small team of half a dozen people could probably build an iPhone game in 10 weeks. 10 weeks is a long time in a research context, and so that's why it's, so that's why I say it's like you have to have the use cases identified in advance and have it be something that doesn't require custom tech. Right? Just it's the same game, but you change the artwork, you change the questions, and you can rinse repeat. I think what's not proven out yet, two things. One is the data comparable to what you get through other mechanisms. I haven't seen anything to prove or refute that. And two, I just lost. It'll come back. Oh, I hate that. Cost. I'll talk to you afterwards.
For what it's worth, I would echo, I think that the trackers, for me, become an ideal way, not existing trackers, but new trackers. That becomes a way to think about deploying gamification.
I remember the other point. It's actually an important one. It's unproven what the longevity is of the engagement model for this. So, like Facebook gaming, Zynga, woo, big deal, right? Well, it's kind of peaking. And I mean, the gamer fascination is a very fickle thing, and it's kind of like what is the big deal in pop culture. And so maintaining relevancy with the consumer is a lot trickier with a game than it is with a lot of other stuff. And so I would be sensitive to how do you kind of stay ahead of the curve on that as well.
Yeah. Although, for what it's worth on that note, Zynga they publicly said that they were a big data company in disguise. So that's certainly how they think of themselves. They don't think of themselves as a game company. They design games in order to capture data. Yeah. So one more question.
I do believe that.
Two. Okay. Sorry, Paula. All right.
Yeah, sure. I do believe that more and more data sources will become free as we go along. But do you see how attitudinal survey data also become free or near free?
I'm sorry, I missed the second
I mean,
part.
there could be so many data sources
Yeah.
that becomes free over a period of time, the behavioral data that comes from different sources. But do you also see that there could be some possibility of the survey data or attitudinal data becoming almost free?
Almost free? I think somebody will try it. I really don't have a good feel for whether it will stick or not, but it kind of depends on like what's the rest of the value prop they're trying to wrap around that free data. I do think that like if you were to look over the next few decades, there's going to be this argument over privacy. I think that's still a really big elephant in the room in all this. And what's likely to happen, in my view, is that for a period of time, we're going to see privacy rules kind of constrict what can be published for free or published in general, because the current generation of legislators and regulators are not people that grew up on the internet. They're people that grew up in prior ecosystems, and so that's what's going to be comfortable and familiar to them. 30 years from now, when folks like my son are trying to go out there and change rules, and they're sharing every single little thing they do about themselves, and they don't have any concerns whatsoever about that, I think you'll start to see the pendulum shift back again. But I think we're probably going to go through a phase here where we get kind of paranoid about what's being shared and about Big Brother coming in and manipulating us through our data. And so I think in that context, the idea of freely available behavioral data could be, I'd be more concerned about the regulatory side of it than anything else. I'd love to have it, though.
Last question. Yes.
Thanks. I was wondering, talking about the games and using games to kind of survey people, how much is it the fun of the game that kind of engages the consumer and allows you to get the research you need versus the emotional aspect of, like with World of Warcraft, that these people who are on there all the time have found a community and it's part of their identity, like they're meeting people at a certain time from all around the world to do a raid. And that's part of their community and their identity versus just a game that somebody's playing because they're bored for fun. So you've been able to collect all this data, but could you specify between fun versus community and where you think you need to get consumers to get that free data?
Yeah, well, in the case of WoW, there's a lot of different motivations that are kind of intermingled here. Some people do it for the community aspect. Some people do it purely because they want a competitive experience against other players. Some people do it because they don't play with others. They play by themselves for the most part, and they just kind of are looking for an escape for a while from the stress of daily life. So there's a lot of different things going on there. I think the tricky bit with games and research is who is the audience that you're going to attract to your game. So in the case of something like WoW, like our players in China are 95% male. And the average age is probably like 23. Our players in the West, the average age is older, maybe, but it's still only maybe 20% female. And so you're not going to be able to use something like that as a platform for collecting survey data in a lot of other contexts, unless you're trying to mix that with other stuff. Again, that's why I think youth research makes a lot of sense, because younger kids, they haven't solidified on a particular preferred genre of game. It's kind of like if there's a way to do research through movies, it'd be easier for younger because they're really kind of all the same. I mean, at a certain, really abstracted level, they're all really the same. You can't say that about movies for adults because you have a lot of different genres, and I like sci-fi dramas, and I like mysteries, and that's what you go to. So I think that would be the other tricky bit, is balancing out the audience that you're getting.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you.